Ready to cozy up your space this fall? Wisconsin Home Goods has just what you need. Hand-poured soy candles crafted in small batches, made to burn clean, and scented with the warm, comforting notes of the season. Stop by their shop at 4664 Cottage Grove Road on Madison's beautiful east side, or browse their fall collection online at wiscohomegoods.com. Shop local, breathe easy, feel good. All autumn long with Wisco Home Goods. Word to the wise, the cold always comes faster than you think. That's why Cardinal is rewarding the early birds. Book your furnace tune-up for just $119 if you do it by September 15th. After October 1st, it's $149. And trust me, you don't want to wait until then. A broken furnace isn't just inconvenient, it's chaos. Smart homeowners get ahead of it. Cardinal's the team Madison trusts to keep homes warm. Book online at cardinalservice.com or call 608-218-3895. This is CityCast Madison. I'm Bianca Martin, and here's what Madison's talking about. Today, a newer city government agency is drawing attention to itself and not necessarily for the right reasons. Since its inception 2 years ago, Madison's Office of the Independent Police Monitor has had something to prove. As a civilian oversight body for the city's police force, it had higher scrutiny from the jump. Now, questions surrounding the office's transparency practices have resurfaced. With me today to dive into what the heck is going on is Isthmus reporter Liam Barron.
Hello, thank you for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for joining us and taking the time. Can you tell us why Madison's Police Oversight Agency is making headlines again?
Yeah, so this most recent instance is related to a records request that I had submitted on May 1st for some records previously requested by former Wisconsin State Journal local government reporter Lucas Robinson. From May 1st, about 4 months later, we still have not heard back, and we recently decided to write about that.
Let's back things up a bit for folks who are unfamiliar with it. What exactly is the Office of the Independent Police Monitor?
So the Office of the Independent Police Monitor was created by the Common Council after the murder of George Floyd, and also reflecting other previous police violence incidents in Madison. It was intended to be a check on the Madison Police Department, so to give potential victims of police violence or anyone who has a concern regarding the police department an alternate sort of option to investigate complaints or to submit information. And it also is responsible for issuing policy recommendations regarding Madison Police Department.
And so the records that you've requested back in May, do you have a sense of what you're seeking from them that you're just not able to get so far?
Yeah, we're looking for communications between Independent Monitor Robin Copley and Madison Police Department, and then communications between Gregory Golumbiak, who is the office's data analyst, and city IT staff.
So, trying to do your work as a reporter and inform the public about what's going on with this office. I actually had the opportunity to speak with both the Independent Police Monitor, Robin Copley, and Office Data Analyst Greg Golumbiak on the show. They both talked about the importance of the office and accountability in city government. How exactly is the Office of the Independent Police Monitor meant to provide accountability to the public?
The Police Monitor is meant to investigate complaints lodged against MPD. So currently there's another process for that as well through the Police and Fire Commission. The OIM kind of represents another option. So a member of the public could submit a complaint to the OIM, and then they could investigate that complaint, come back with findings and recommendations.
And so this office has only been around since 2023. The Madison Police Civilian Oversight Board was formed in 2020. And yet it seems like they have both had some rocky starts. Madison is the first city in Wisconsin to have an office like this. So some turbulence is expected. But at the same time, it's been years now. Are we past the learning period? Is it time for the city to maybe hold the offices accountable?
That's certainly an argument that some alders have put forth. I think there's been some dissatisfaction from the city council in terms of the office's progress. So the complaint form that's kind of traditionally been seen as being at the center of the office's work wasn't actually published until 2024. And last budget cycle, the council kind of, to put it lightly, pretty heavily criticized the OIM for a lack of progress in terms of getting set up. It's important to note, too, that it's not just the office. There's a police civilian oversight board, which kind of acts as the office's supervisor and boss. And so they also, through the beginning had some issues with meeting quorum. Those issues have largely been resolved, but that was another sort of thing at play in terms of the council's perception of the OIM office. But yeah, I would say in this past budget cycle especially, there was a lot of concerns from city alders in terms of the sort of lack of progress and noticeable benchmarks coming from the OIM.
Yeah, and we're once again towards the budget season for 2026 in terms of the mayor just put out her capital budget. The operations budget for the city is going to be put forward. So city council is thinking about these things about who's getting funding and who's not. Do you have a sense of what the temperature is like today? Like, is it a majority of alders who are seeking more accountability from the OIM or just a few voices?
So far, I've really only heard from a few voices, and really most particularly one. Council Vice President MGR Govindarashan has lanced some criticism towards the OIM, less so for the whole Isthmus record situation and more so for an annual report that hasn't been submitted to council. So under city ordinance, the OIM is supposed to submit an annual report on its progress over the past year by March 15th. Robin Copley did submit that report, but Council President Regina Vidver flagged some issues that she had with it, particularly the lack of an executive summary. So that's like that 2 to 3 page sort of introduction to a report that highlights the main accomplishments an office has had over the past year. And then also some issues with partisan elements, she called them, of the report. So there was a section in the report where Copley sort of criticized the Trump administration and called on the community to kind of support each other. Council President Regina Vidver found that sort of inappropriate for a city report because typically city reports are supposed to be nonpartisan. They're supposed to represent all the taxpayers in the city, and the agency who is promulgating them is supposed to maintain a nonpartisan view. In this case, Vidver didn't feel like that was reflected in this report. That's sort of the main concern that Govindarashan spoke about to me. He's considering, given the fact that this report with edits still hasn't been submitted to the council, they're supposed to take a vote on it. That hasn't happened yet. In light of that, Govindarashan is considering either rejecting the additional funding that this office is seeking the upcoming budget cycle or potentially cutting below their base level budget. They receive about $400,000 annually. They're looking for an additional approximate $65,000. So rejecting that $65,000 or potentially going even below that $400,000.
It sounds pretty serious in the sense that if the main product that the office needs to produce doesn't have lined out like what the accomplishments were, which is more or less fairly standard, like you said, and also if it's unusable in certain ways or puts certain heat on the city. So I do want to ask, like, other than this annual report, has the office produced any other results or recommendations or deliverables?
So they did include recommendations in that annual report. I believe there are about 7 of them. Other deliverables, I would say that the office has had a string of community meetings. So that's kind of part of the office's purview to have these community engagement meetings to get a sense of how the community is interacting with MPD, any concerns that folks might have, any positive points, and kind of gain some ideas there. In terms of the complaints, I don't believe there's been a complaint investigation fulfilled yet. Not entirely sure on that, but the complaints still have been relatively slow, is at least my perception. I'm not sure if there's more information.
Well, yeah, what does the mayor have to say about this? The office is unique in that it doesn't report to her, but of course, she likely has thoughts and has a big part in the city's budget.
I have not heard from the mayor yet on this, so you can kind of do some, I guess, guesswork. In the last budget cycle, the mayor proposed a pretty substantial cut to the office's budget. I want to say that was about $170,000. And the office viewed that as essentially decimating its work. Eventually, the council voted to restore $130,000 of that funding. But from that cut, you can kind of gain a sense of dissatisfaction with the office's work. But as you noted, the OIM exists somewhat independently of the mayor's office. And there's actually language written in the ordinance that created it that specifically says that the mayor and the common council is not supposed to use its political influence to, I believe the term is, quote unquote, unduly influence the work of the OIM.
Yeah, this is really tricky area because the office in and of itself was made to be this independent force, right? So there are not going to be other forces telling them what to do or how to run the office. But there also part of it is an agency around transparency. And, when I did have the opportunity to interview Robin Copley on the show, it was early on in the process back in 2023. But my experience trying to get answers about certain things was a little tricky. It was a little hard, I'll be honest. There wasn't a lot of clarity and they were keeping things pretty close to the chest. But even back last November, so last fall, winter, talking to Greg Golumbik, there was this thing please give us a chance. We need time to get all of this together, to get our stuff sorted out. And it is feeling like getting close to the 11th hour again for their budget. Have you had an opportunity to talk to either Greg or Robin?
We've spoken with Greg a little bit through email. He had mentioned some corrections to the article and given some additional context. We have not heard from Copley directly, no.
Fall's about to be busy, y'all, and I'm getting on my grind, working out in the AMs or truly whenever I can get them in. The one thing I wish I had more of is time, particularly in the mornings. Fortunately, Huel gets that too. Huel, spelled Huel, their Black Edition powder is a complete meal, so you feel full, focused, and ready for your day. I'm someone who spends so much time adding ingredients to my smoothies, and Huel cuts that prep down to almost nothing. At less than $3 per meal, it's packed with 40 grams of plant-based protein and 27 essential vitamins and minerals. And just when you thought Huel had everything covered, they just dropped a first-of-its-kind Super Greens drink in a can. This is your daily greens, 42 vitamins, minerals, and superfoods. Only 25 calories, 4 grams of fiber, 1 gram of sugar, made by dietitians. Try Huel with 15% off for new customers today using our code Madison at Huel.com/Madison. Fuel your best performance with Huel today. Part of us talking to you is the fact that you are trying to get information from the office and are having trouble. For folks who aren't terribly familiar with how records requests process goes, which outside of journalists and government workers tuning in, which I know some of you are listening, I have to imagine a decent number of folks listening aren't super familiar. So Liam, can you explain what that process is like? What rules do public offices have to follow when it comes to these legally binding requests?
Yeah, for sure. So like you said, these public records requests are legally binding. In state statute, it's written that public records are presumed to be the property of the people. So government public records, with limited exception, are supposed to be viewable by the public. Typically, how a records request works is that a journalist or other member of the public, it could be another member of government, will reach out to a person deemed a records custodian and type out, or, phone call, whatever medium, but submit a records request that usually asks for a specific type of communication over a specific time period, coming from a certain person or being received by a certain person. Those records requests, the timeline is a little malleable. So I would say a decade or so ago, they were supposed to be fulfilled within about 10 days. Nowadays, it's a little bit more malleable. I would say that typically it can be anywhere from a week to a month. Longer than that for larger record requests, maybe spanning multiple people, maybe spanning multiple different formats of conversation, but they're supposed to be returned within a time that is as soon as practicable and without delay. And they are supposed to be returned typically free of charge. Sometimes there is a fee if there's substantial staff time being used to find these records, and they might have limited redactions. The custodian is required to explain to you any redactions that are made. And if a request is denied, and this happens fairly often, say you're requesting records from a university and they are covered by FERPA, which is the privacy law that covers students' personal information, the university might just deny that records request, but they do have to tell you that they are denying that records request in writing and explain to you why.
Are you surprised by this at all, that we're sitting here in September and you put these requests out in May?
Yeah, I would say I'm fairly surprised. So Copley, first of all, is a former professional in public records. She worked for both the Milwaukee Police Department and Wisconsin Division of Medicaid Services in public records. And obviously, her job right now also interfaces pretty regularly with the public records system. And especially given the fact that we reached out to the city attorney's office, who have pressed Copley multiple times for the release of these records, that lack of release, and particularly the lack of response, is pretty surprising to me. So typically, like, when you submit a records request, you'll usually get an automated response that is through the city's records portal, essentially saying, hey, we've received your request for records. Usually you'll also get a personalized response from the records custodian saying, we received your records request. Sometimes they might tell you how long it takes. This happens like pretty frequently, both in other city agencies and in other like levels of government. We have received literally no communication from Copley, nothing kind of confirming the receipt of the records request, which I have never had that happen before in the likely above 100 records requests I've submitted.
Wow. So this is totally unique in your experience as a reporter and setting these record requests out.
Yes. And I feel like in general, it's a little different for this agency because they don't have, if you're looking at a larger institution like UW-Madison or say like Wisconsin Department of Corrections, they will have a specific person whose only job it is to handle records requests. Copley is the designated records custodian for this office. Obviously, she has other duties in her job. That being said, yeah, I've never had this situation happen to me before.
You mentioned this earlier, but it is budget season. And what concerns me, and I assume the office itself, is that the office's funding has been on the chopping block in the past. As you reported and shared, they received just under $400,000 annually from the city, and they're asking for more, for around $65,000 in next year's budget. Do you have a sense of what the budget outlook's looking like for the office these days? And if not, when we might know more?
I'm not exactly sure. I think it's going to come down to how distressed the council is by this news. And I think, certainly when the mayor releases her executive budget, I think we might get a little bit of a better picture. But in terms of what might happen in the future, I think that's still kind of up in the air. Last budget session for the OAM, it was a little bit of a battle. They kind of had to make an argument for themselves, and a lot of the council was pretty skeptical. I believe at the time, Alder Tag Evers said something like, we're appreciative of the fact that you're doing this work. At the same time, we have a right to demand results from you. I imagine those same conversations are going to come up again in this cycle, and a lot of those same things are going to be said.
Right. And so the OIM fits into the executive operational budget for the city. So that's something that we'll find out more about next month in October, right? That's when it's scheduled to come out. I mentioned that I spoke with Greg Golumbik, the data analyst at the office, back last November. He said Madison's police oversight bodies is one of the most empowered in the nation. That really stuck with me. And he mentioned that the agency has a decent relationship with the Madison Police Department. Is that your understanding? And also, bigger picture, like what kind of loss would it be for the city and for the people of Madison if this office were to go away?
In terms of the relationship with MPD, it's a little different now because interim chief John Patterson is now the new chief of MPD. From everything I've heard, he's had a pretty strong relationship with this OIM office. Sean Barnes, the former Madison police chief, once he left his position, he went on Madison 365 and sort of blasted the office, said that they're, quote unquote, a hammer looking for a nail and probably pose one of the greatest threats to the trust and legitimacy we've built up between the police department and the community. I don't know to what degree that was something that Barnes only felt, if that's something that's permeated more throughout MPD. But at the time during Barnes's tenure, obviously there was some sort of bad will between Barnes and the OIM.
Yeah, that seemed clear when I spoke with former chief Sean Barnes on this podcast, and he made his disapproval clear about that relationship. So it's interesting to hear that it shifted.
Yeah, and everything that I've heard, folks at the OAM enjoy working with Chief Patterson. I believe the PCOB has a strong working relationship with him as well. So I don't know how things have shifted since then. I do know that former Chief Barnes, like you say, has, had some qualms with the office.
And if the office were to go away, I know that it's new, but what kind of loss would it be for the city and the people of Madison?
It would be a fairly substantial one. I think there are a lot of folks in this community who, they view this as an option in a situation where there aren't many options. So if you don't want to go to the PFC, you can go to the OAM, and that is another option to have your complaint or your feedback investigated and taken seriously. And in terms of policing in the city, I think that's something that a lot of folks value. There was a lot of sort of promise, I would say, that was talked about when this office was being formed, and it would be kind of just like this slow petering out of an office that a lot of people had hopes for. I think back in the November budget session, I want to say Maya Pearson, who is the chair of the PCOB, had said something along the lines of, that these offices take a while to start up, and I think there is a feeling among the people who support this office that they're still trying to get all their ducks in a row and get started. And so I think for those folks, this would be a major sort of blow to an office they feel is finally getting on its feet.
Yeah, and you mentioned that you did have some exchange with Greg Golumbik, the data analyst in the office, in response to your story. In any of that, did you get any sense of whether the office feels like they're accomplishing their charge and, what they're setting out to do?
Yeah, I would say Greg feels that the office is accomplishing what it's meant to be doing.
And maybe it's just a little unclear to folks on council at this time because they didn't have an executive summary of the accomplishments, that it was sort of like figure it out within this annual report.
Yeah, and I think the other sort of thing is just the fact that this report hasn't appeared on Logistar yet. That's the city's sort of legislation management online system, and it hasn't come before the council for a vote or to ask staff questions. I think that's something that's causing a bit of confusion and a lack of information among council members.
Well, Liam, we do appreciate your reporting, and, we are curious out here. I can speak for myself about what's happening with the office, and it is a very important charge. So I hope to read your piece and we find out more about what's happening soon.
Thanks for having me on, Bianca.
That's Liam Barron, reporter at Isthmus. And some news. Shortly after this interview was recorded, Liam received his records from the Office of the Independent Police Monitor. Watch out for his reporting on isthmus.com. That's all for today, here on CityCast Madison. I'm Bianca Martin, your host. Don't forget, you can support this show and get great perks by becoming a CityCast Madison neighbor at membership.citycast.fm. And if you enjoyed today's show, why not share this episode with someone who cares about police and government accountability? All right, we'll be back tomorrow morning with more stories from around the city. Until then, take good care.